This video was presented by Bob Lazar as a detailed public explanation of some of his main claims. It was recorded in 1991, 2 years after he exposed his story to the public. It was filmed by his friend Gene Huff, and despite being rudimentary, it does a good job of presenting his points. Whether they are convincing or not is a completely different story, and we will tackle this issue now.
Hi, I'm Bob Lazar. During late 1988 and early 89, I worked on the propulsion systems of extraterrestrial vehicles for the United States government.
That's Bob Lazar presenting himself. He seems natural and confident. This is a very important aspect of his demeanor. First, he presents his credentials, claiming that he had above top secret clearances. He explains that he worked at Los Alamos and at S4, a secret facility beside the main Area 51. Bob then lays out his objectives with the video very clearly. He will basically talk about the things that he had direct knowledge of, and will just briefly note that the second part he only heard of, so he cannot be criticized in this video for that aspect. However, in the totality of his narrative, these parts must be factored in. And before we engage with the proper substance of this video, let me make something clear. If parts of his conclusions or narrative are wrong, it doesn't make the case completely invalid or any less puzzling, because there are many intriguing aspects beyond what he says here. Having said that, let's start. The first part is mainly concentrated on how the discs would cover vast distances in very little time, and that is through the use of a gravitational field. How this gravitational field is generated, and lastly, what the power source is and how it functions. Lazar claims that the best way to travel between two distant points in space is through distortion of space and time, or bending time itself. That, he says, would be possible by creating a very strong gravitational field. Things start off with standard Einstein, but then something strange happens. He mentions gravity A and B, but he describes gravity A just like what we call the strong force. By that time, everyone was familiar with the strong force, so that immediately provoked a strong reaction from the public. Did he actually know what he was talking about? Why would he make such a gross mistake? A minute or two later in the video, he refers to this force by its proper name, the strong force. However, Lazar's claim implies that increasing the strong force somehow couples to gravity to generate a usable field. But particle physics offers no mediator between gluons, strong force carriers, and gravitons, space-time curvature. There's no pathway by which tweaking nuclear binding energies would warp space-time on macroscopic scales. Notwithstanding, it sounds nice to hear someone thinking outside the box. But let's continue, as Lazar now tells us about a font of infinite energy we can supposedly tap into. He explains that some elements in the periodic table do not exist on our planet, but exist elsewhere in the universe. So the power source is a nuclear reactor that uses element 115. According to Lazar, this element is stable enough to be used to distort time and space. This reactor works as a proton accelerator, transforming element 15 into element 155 into element 15N16, which decays instantly. This process, according to Lazar, produces any matter, and any matter has an optimum use of all the energy contained in the atoms. Now there is the big elephant in the room, and that is element 115. It was synthesized in Moscow in 2004. In reality, when element 115 Moscovium, Mach, was synthesized in 2003 by Russian and American teams, every isotope had a half-life of milliseconds, all highly unstable. Theoretical models do predict an island of stability near this region, but at best that would mean half-lives of seconds, minutes, maybe days, not a stable lump of matter you could machine into reactor parts. Lazar claimed bombarding element 115 with protons released gravity waves, or exotic energy. Nuclear physics says bombarding unstable heavy nuclei just makes them decay, spitting out alpha particles, helium nuclei, until they fizzle. There's no known mechanism by which element 115 could produce a field, bend space-time, or function as a power source. In fact, his explanations make the points go from bad to worse. However, none of these stop people from considering the possibility that perhaps Lazar was right after all, and that this information could be correct. But for me, the problem goes much further than these supposedly poor theoretical gimmicks. His picture of the simplified little man in his simple craft, with the crude rumbling reactor, does not hold up compared to what the phenomenon shows us. In other words, this picture does not hold water when set against the complexity of the phenomenon. UFOs involve high strangeness, shifts in perception, psychic effects, impossible maneuvers, contradictory behavior, and craft splitting into several parts and then recombining into one. These don't fit into a neat fuel and engine schema. The 115 story is cozy because it translates the phenomenon into technology we can almost imagine building ourselves, just a bit ahead of current science. Actual UFO experiences are not cozy at all. They destabilize witnesses, cross boundaries between physical and mental, and leave traces that don't match any conventional framework. Instead of being one step beyond physics, they feel like they are operating under an entirely different logic, to the point that some people summon UFOs or aliens, and at times they manage to take pictures or film, but these cases are always shrouded in plausible deniability. So this coziness could perhaps be some level of confabulation, providing something that would not fall too far outside what is acceptable. Perhaps this proposal was floated in the first place precisely because one can relate to it. But it would remain just far enough into the future to avoid being tested. That gave Lazar's mythos time to propagate in the public sphere, which it did, so much so that it was recuperated many years later and is still in full swing today. During the video, Bob Lazar mentions a UFO he entered, what he calls the sport model, which is a copycat of Billy Meyer's UFOs. This could also be seen as confabulation. It is in fact a slick model, so if it is confabulation, why pick a design that most ufologists already considered a fake? So what does that tell us? That his message is so true, it would even outweigh such a coincidence? Or is it a hidden signal? Again, I'm not going to get deep into the sport model here, only to note that he presented it in the video and that it is not part of the compelling evidence for his claims. At this point in time, moscovium, the synthetic element that we have been able to produce in labs, does not present the properties he claimed, so it is useless in a reactor. On this point, the scientific establishment has every right to be wary of his claims. Now, as I just said, it shouldn't sound right to ufologists either, because propulsion systems are no longer the key issue. UFOs seem to crop up from anywhere, and they barely obey the laws of physics. They are more akin to some type of gameplay. Still, element 1.5 holds the ultimate fascination for us. It promises to be, just like alchemical gold, the key to reaching the stars. That provokes non-ufologists into believing the final gap in scientific denial has at last been filled. Bob's assertion is therefore rather mythical, and his steadfast posture defies the skeptical position. The man clearly believes what he's saying, whether it is right or wrong. I don't doubt that Bob Lazar is faithfully telling what he was told. Where I hesitate is in assuming that what he was told was the truth, or the full truth. I suspect he may have been given a misleading story. That doesn't necessarily make him a fraud, it makes him a messenger caught inside someone else's design. It is my perception, and I'm not alone here, that true information about strategic capabilities would never be allowed to leak out under any circumstances. That is especially true regarding element 115, and I gather that Lazar took some of it with him. Now, Grant Cameron's reading of the whole affair was that the entire thing was a controlled leak by the good guys out there. He considers this affair an oblique leak full of plausible deniability. I agree that it seems to be a controlled leak, but I disagree with the purpose. I don't believe in any free lunch coming out of Area 51, and neither should you.
Conclusion.
Let's briefly sum up the ideas of this video. A. The use of the strong force to explain gravity A is very sketchy, to say the least. B. Element 115 remains unproven, reality works against it. It looks impressive on paper though. C. The reactor and the sport model are simplistic, exactly what we might expect, but they do not align with the far greater complexity of the UFO phenomenon. So there may be an element of seduction and confabulation there. D. Despite all this, Lazar maintains his composure and comes across as absolutely believable. E. It may be that he was genuinely shown these things and is simply repeating them, but what he saw does not necessarily align with the truth. F. Real whistleblowers usually don't stick around. They face severe consequences. By comparison, Lazar's path doesn't look that hard. We're not done with Lazar quite yet. We are preparing a longer video, mainly based on his friendship with a pivotal figure, John Lear. Goodbye for now, and I hope to see you later.
We chased the craft but missed the game, a tale well told, yet never the same. He spoke of engines, bends in space, but truth, it seems, wore another face. Not science, but theatre behind the veil. A myth in motion, set to sail.
The text of this video is based on Dan Zarfati's book, The Time is Right, the Ufological Hall of Mirrors,